In chapter 5 of Galatians, starting in verse 22, Paul introduces us to these 9 characteristics that he calls the fruit of the Spirit. We can think of them as ways to describe God's character. A couple of years ago, I tried to do an intense study on these 9 characteristics, learn more about them, to put them in my own life. I thought, regardless of faith, anybody that portrays these 9 characters is living a life worth living, is leaving the world better than they found it, and quite frankly is going to be remembered the way I'd like to be remembered. But more importantly, these are the characteristics of God. The more I learn about them, the more I learn about Him. Some of these seem very easy and obvious. For instance, kindness. Be kind. I've got 3 kids. We tell them to be kind in one way or another often. I was told as I was a child to be kind. We all know what that means. Be nice. So I sort of glanced over that one, thinking that I understand that. I can move on. But then I started realizing kindness is a little more complex. There's more layers to it than just being nice. And besides that, well, what does it mean that God is kind? He's nice. He's a nice God. Is that it? Is that even accurate? Is there not something else? There's an old movie called Awakenings. It's based on a true story. It's about these patients who have a disease that has basically made them physically paralyzed. There's a doctor that comes along, a guy named Dr. Sayer. In the movie, he's played by Robin Williams. And he has a theory that there's some medicine that might be able to help these people. And these are people who have kind of been more or less forgotten about. There's certainly no thought towards healing these people. The best they can hope for is a comfortable life with the illness that they have. But Dr. Sayer comes along and he brings hope. And hope can be scary, especially when you have so much potential to gain. But Dr. Sayer starts to have some success. He begins treating a patient named Leonard, who is played by Robert De Niro in this movie. And Leonard starts to show some signs of improvement. He begins to wake up, in a sense. And other patients begin to wake up. And there's a lot of celebration and a lot of wonderful praise going on that these people who have lost decades of their lives are now able to live again. But unfortunately, this awakening is short-lived, and the patients begin to go back to the state they were in before Dr. Sayer ever showed up. There's a scene in the movie after Leonard, who became good friends with Dr. Sayer, after he's relapsed back into the vegetative state he had lived in. And Dr. Sayer's watching a video of Leonard's early progress, brushing his teeth, doing interviews, smiling, laughing, happy. And at this point, Nurse Costello walks into the room and catches Dr. Sayer watching this old video. With tears in his eyes, he asks Nurse Costello about something she had told Leonard once. Dr. Sayer says, "You told him I was a kind man. How kind is it to give life, only to take it away again?" And Nurse Costello responds, "It's given and taken away from all of us." And Dr. Sayer says, "Why doesn't that comfort me?" And Nurse Costello answers, "Because you are a kind man." And kindness, as I learned from Nurse Costello, is a complex part of God's Spirit. Kindness does not spare us hurt. In fact, the opposite is true. The curse of the fruit of the Spirit is that those who take it on also take on the burden of those in and around their own lives. So what does this tell me about God? If kindness is a fruit of God's Spirit, then it is a part of His nature. Sometimes it's easy to think of God as someone who's detached and indifferent about the world He created. But this can't be the case. God, because of His nature being kind, is also deeply compassionate to the point where He cannot be indifferent. Like Dr. Sayer, His kindness prevents him from rationalizing situations to comfort himself. He's not immune to hurting. He takes on our burdens. Because of His nature, He suffers with those who are suffering. This reminds me of a middle school boys' Bible class that I led on Wednesday nights years ago. We were talking about some pretty heavy stuff, and sometimes the questions got so deep I couldn't answer them. I remember one night there was a boy that raised his hand and said he had a question. But instead of asking a question, he started talking about this kid in his class at school, and how this kid was a really nice guy, but he didn't believe in God. This obviously weighed heavily on the boy's mind, and after rambling for a few minutes, he just sort of stopped talking. He never actually asked the question. So I asked him, "And what's your question?" He looked lost. He said, I don't know, I just wish everyone could go to heaven." What do you say to that? The room was silent, waiting for an answer. It was obvious that this boy's sentiment for the world to be saved was shared by every other boy in that Wednesday night Bible class. I felt the exact same way, and yet I had no answer. It was several days later when I realized that God also wants everyone to go to heaven. After all, that's why He went through the pain of sending Christ. That compassion for others that all of us in that room shared with God, that is kindness.